Welcome back, artists. I'm Wyatt Paints, and today I'm diving into part 3 of our Fantastic Four diorama with the Invisible Woman herself, Sue Storm, the most powerful member of the team and honestly one of the most deadly Marvel characters there is. Now, just like with Reed, we're going to be dealing with a bodysuit and a highly detailed face, but I also wanted to show off her using her unique ability in a very obvious way. I think I succeeded. Hopefully, you'll agree. And contrary to what I thought, I was able to do this effect airbrush free, so all of you can follow along without any specialized equipment. Now time is disappearing fast. I'm gonna head over to my painting table. Let's get started. I started with Sue primed in black Rust-Oleum. While I prefer to use flat black for these type of models, I ran out mid-priming and had to switch to gloss. It's not really a big deal, but I didn't want you to think that I did it for a reason. I started basing the suit with the same royal blue we used previously. Once again, this base coat is mainly to put a blue tint on all the shadows, so it doesn't have to be neat or tidy, it just has to be thin and all over. So an overbrush is just what the doctor ordered to lay this down. You may notice that the arms are missing, and this is because I wanted to show off that intangibility using clear resin arms. And the way they sit on her would make it difficult to paint around, so a sub-assembly makes sense. And thankfully, as luck will have it, Sue has this billowing hair that'll help hide any imperfections in the scene. Now for those invisible arms. It looked pretty weird to have a hard line where the color just stops, so I want the color to fade away as you go down the arm. So when I primed these, I only barely dusted the tops near the shoulders. And when I based them with the blue, I wanted to cover the black completely and extend it just past the end of the primer. This uses acrylic's transparency to pull off a bit of an optical illusion in the eye. The black primer blocks more light from passing through compared to the blue paint alone, leaving us with a look that reads like a gradual loss of tangibility. After drying, she was nicely tinted blue, and those arms were looking great. Next up, magic blue for the midtone. And yup, you guessed it, we're going to be using a dry brush here. So the name of the game is brush and paint control. Don't overload your brush and make judicious use of a texture palette to check how the paint is coming off the brush before you touch it to the model. Also remember to first go to the areas that should have the most light, like the chest, shoulders, and the tops of the thighs. Then blend towards the shadow as less and less paint comes off your brush. For the arms, I kept this blue to the upper half to create two different transitions, from light to dark and then dark to invisible. In my head, it just sort of makes more sense that the arm darkens before it disappears. I made sure to check it with the model once it was dry to make sure everything was matching. Looks good. Finally, Void Shield was the final highlight. Here, I'm focusing this on the high points of the large highlight areas, like the chest and the thigh and the upper backside. I'm also making sure to highlight all the tiny ripples and the long seams along the suit. The two key things to remember here is 1, we want it so light that it takes several brush strokes before we start to notice a change. This will give us a nice soft glow to the highlight. Second, we want to keep the angle of the brush strokes perpendicular to the grain of the fabric. Otherwise, we risk the bristles falling into the grooves and washing out that royal blue we laid down in the first step. And for the arms, the goal is to match the highlight level of the shoulder. Once dry, I use matte black to black out the boots, belt, collar, and emblem. Be sure to take your time when it comes to painting those edges. The extra few minutes you take here to paint clean will save you many more minutes from repainting, especially around the emblem. Next up, ash gray. First, a quick 2 coats on the soles of her shoes. Then I started highlighting up the insignia. A stiff bristle stipple will lay this down fairly quickly. Just remember to keep your taps straight down and straight up, just like using a stamp. For the second step of glow, an old favorite here, spaceship exterior. Again, using a straight up and down stamping motion until I got the level of highlight I was looking for. Finally, magic glue to finish off the fore and outer ring. Remember to not overload and to use the belly of the brush so that you only paint the top surface. With the suit all finished up, I figured this is a great time to take a second and thank my subscribers over on Patreon. And this week, we've got a new name on the list. So a special thank you and hello to Raymond. I appreciate the support. And another special thank you to all the new subscribers here on YouTube. You all busted through 1,200 with gusto. That's just wild. And the painting pantheon is already well on its way to 1,300. So if you like the videos, be sure to like and subscribe. Help us get to 1,300 and you'll be served my videos on the regular. With that out of the way, let's get back to Sue. Just like with Reed, Sue's face is going to be where we're going to spend at least 50% of our painting time to get it right. And like with Reed, we're going to need the wet palette that we used before to keep the paints in a ready state. For my flesh tones, I picked dwarf skin and light flesh. Just like previously, I made 3 intermediate mixes at roughly 75-25, 50-50, and 25-75. Remember, this is just a guideline. If you have to fiddle with them a little bit until they look like even steps to you, so be it. If you're using a wet palette, you have plenty of time to work this until you're ready. I started the base with the darkest tone. You may notice this is going on particularly thin, and this is what happens when you use an airbrush thin paint on a wet palette. It gets a bit over thin, but it's not really a big deal. You can just paint multiple layers to build up the color. You just have to make sure that you let each one dry completely before you decide to start the next one. Here's Sue after 6 coats, nice and smooth. Now for the next color up. Here I'm covering up most of the skin on the face, leaving the deep shadow only really under her brow and around her nose. Now since Sue is typically drawn with a very fair complexion, one thing I don't want to do is overshadow the face too much, and it can start to take on a noir film kind of dramatic lighting effect. And along with her stern expression, this can sometimes make the figure look more angry than I intended. And with Sue here, I'm looking to go for more of a hardened determination rather than anger. After a couple of passes and a few minutes to dry, I was on to the middle tone. Here, I started to shape my highlights by starting in the brightest areas and blending towards the darker spots, like from her cheekbones down to her jawline. After drying, she was looking a bit ghost-like, but this is a trust the process kind of thing, so I pushed on to color number 4. Again, first painting in the areas I want the most highlighting and then blending down to the shadow areas. One reason that this technique works like this is that you're depositing a majority of the paint from the brush into those highlight areas. And so long as you don't start with an overloaded brush, by the time you get to the blending part, you'll have much less paint on the brush. So you end up putting thinner, more translucent tints of color. Once dry, you can see even with a very narrow band of contrast, her face already looks quite serious. I wanted to give the skin ample time to dry and cure before making any final decisions on it, so I blocked out the eyes with that ash gray that I used earlier. This is just to prevent any overpainting of the flesh tones from tinting the whites of the eye. Once I finished with that, the skin was actually dry and it looked good enough to leave as is. Time to base her hair with desert yellow. Now from my memory, Mrs. Storm's hair ranged from about a medium blonde or strawberry blonde all the way up to platinum, depending on which book you were reading. So it's kind of dealer's choice on this. Personally, I'm partial to the medium, but if you wanted strawberry blonde, I would say start with a bright orange or red, and for a platinum blonde, I would start with like a lemon yellow. Now there may be some areas that is just tough to get a brush into. You can alleviate this a bit if you make sure that your brush strokes run along the flow of the hair. This lets the brush get deeper into the cracks and lay down color. Now there might be some spots in the curls that you just can't reach. Don't ruin your brush trying to reach them, it'll be fine as black. It'll just be a very deep shadow and add to the look. After 2 even coats, her hair was looking deeply blonde and ready for a highlight, using the lemon yellow I mentioned earlier. Here I'm using a very light dry brush. The idea now is to keep my strokes perpendicular to the grain so that I can quickly edge highlight every strand. This allows me to keep the highlight even while also maintaining a majority of that desert yellow. The deeper yellow is what's going to help this lemon yellow really shine. So check your work often after every few strokes and ask yourself, does this need more? Because the highlight is going to happen faster than you realize. So take your time. We're almost done with this project, and it's steps like these in the last 10% that can help elevate the whole piece, not just the one section you're actively painting. Next, a small dab of Brain's Pink. This was mainly to lighten up the lips a touch for my next step, so I just painted within the lines and let it dry before moving on to Squid Pink. Typically, whenever I see Sue in the comics, she keeps it pretty simple when it comes to makeup, and that's good news for me. So a fairly neutral pink lip gloss will be enough. Next, I used a bit of light tone to isolate the face. I felt the blonde hair and the pale skin kind of washed each other out, and there needed to be a bit of a visual cue where that line is. And since I had it out, I decided to hit the darkest details of her face just to add in a little bit more depth, while also being careful not to overdo this and get that noir look I've been trying to avoid. Next, I trimmed down and positioned some eye decals into place. Now, these small ones can be particularly tricky to handle. I ended up ruining 3 sets of eyes before I got a pair in the right place. Once I got them into a good position, I clear coated Sue and called her done. And you know what? She came out great! There was an invisible shield that I printed out, but it came out pretty foggy and it just made it hard to see Sue behind it, so I left it off. But I think the choice of clear arms and the transition makes up for the lack of the shield. And what do you all think? Be sure to let me know in the comments. I make sure to read all of them and reply to any questions you may have on this or any other project, so don't hesitate to ask. And with just Johnny Storm to go, it's going to feel so good to finish up a big project like this. I hope you all enjoyed the video, and I'll see you next week. But as always, thanks for watching, stay creative, and always enjoy the process.